Okay, they've done it again. We have yet another deep research product. Feel overwhelmed by all the different products that have deep research or deep search or thinking models or standard models, or there's so much out there that I don't want you to feel overwhelmed about this, and I don't want you to feel confused by what you should buy, what you should use, whether or not you're missing out. And in fact, a spoiler of this whole video is really the majority of the time, you really don't need this deep research thing. It really can be facilitated by other means. Not always, and deep research absolutely has its place, and I'm very excited about it, but I think you'll see a lot of the times the other tools can already get this job done. We're really going to take a look at all of the different outputs with the exact same query that asks about TV shows, so you might have some context to what the right result should be. Let's dive in and take a look at all of the different tools and modes and features and prices and see what it's all about. Okay, just before we get lost in the weeds of all of these different models and all of the things that they're going to be able to do or not do, let's talk very briefly about what am I talking about deep research, thinking models, standard models. Some of y'all might be confused by this. Very basically, if you've used ChatGPT or an LLM like that, where you go type something into a chat search engine like we have here, and it replies with chat information and you talk back and forth, those kinds of things. That's just a standard model that you will get very fast responses from. And today, if you look at the top of ChatGPT, for example, and you select the model name at the top, you can see that there's the 4.0 model, 4.0 with scheduled tasks, the 0.1 model, 0.3 mini, 0.3 mini high, 4.0 mini, 4 model. There's a bunch of models. But essentially what you're seeing is certain models that are simplistic, easier to search against, easier to ask questions of. They're going to come back very quickly. It will use generally the data that it has in its mind at that moment to answer your question. That's not necessarily the truth. Some of these models, GPT-4o specifically, will actually use the internet when it thinks it has to already today. So some of these have already become kind of this compound system that's doing a little bit more. So even when I say a simple model, it gets more and more difficult for us to define which ones are going to the internet and which ones aren't. But in any case, let's imagine there's simple models, then there's thinking models. Thinking models, very simply, might be a kind of model you ask a question. Before it gives you the answer back, you'll see it thinking a little bit, and then it'll give you a more thoughtful answer back, is the theory. Let's give one of those a shot, since maybe not everybody's seen a thinking model. What is Donald Duck's middle name? I mean, I didn't expect Donald Duck to have a middle name. I'm sorry. I thought this would be one that might give it a little bit of pause because it might have to think about it. But as you can see here, Fauntleroy is apparently Donald Duck's middle name. Cute, okay. And you can see this is the thinking that it had before it answered the question. As simplistic as this question apparently was for it, sometimes this can go on for quite a while in these thinking models. So that's the concept behind the thinking models. The next thing is down here in the chat area itself. You will start noticing more and more tools. And a lot of these systems today have these tools. One of them is deep research, and that's the one that we're actually talking about. So deep research is the one that actually goes and searches the internet, compiles all that information, thinks about those results, figures out if it's enough, goes back to the internet, gets more supporting information if it's not enough, that kind of thing, back and forth. Truly, the word research is doing a little bit of work here. It's meaningful. The systems do differing levels of that kind of analysis, but they all do go get tons of resources from the internet and read through it and kind of compile a report for you on the other side. And that's what we'll see. So that's the difference between the standard model, the thinking model, and the research model. With that, let's dive in and take a look at OpenAI's deep research model. Okay, here we are. Very simply, let's ask it a simple question. I would love a recipe for brownies that is delicious, includes chocolate of some kind, but not chocolate chips, has great reviews, and is from a reputable chef. And I'm going to do deep research on that. And what we'll see generally is it asks some questions first. This is what I am seeing as a typical behavior of OpenAI's deep research. So it comes back and says, if you answer these questions, it'll help me do my research. Oh yeah, definitely fudgy brownies. Milk chocolate. Oh, caramel. Oh, that sounds great. Never heard of that. And no dietary restrictions. So let's go with those. Okay, and we won't stay here for this one, but we will come back at the end to see if this thing is going to give us a good recipe, of course. When these things kick off, you cannot interrupt. Once you've kicked them off, they take some time. OpenAI's takes clearly the most time, double or triple any of the other models that we'll see here. But it also does a really very good job. You can kind of watch it think over here if you need to. see what the different activity is, what it's thinking about. I found fudgy caramel brownies, search for chef, I'm weighing the merits of half-baked harvest, preppy kitchen, considering the credibility. So you can see as it's going through it how it thinks about each one of those steps, and that might help you understand where it might have gone wrong in some of its research. Let me clearly state for all of these, and so that you understand this stuff can definitely return great results. I've had really good results from it. It also can be off. So check the work. Make sure that you're using, your typical judgmental eye when you're reading through the reports that you're getting back, and assuming that it might not have gotten everything right. Check the sources and other things. It will say, I found this on this page, and when you go read the page, it doesn't actually exist in some cases. This is true for all of them, not just the OpenAI report. I think it loses context of which web page had what information, and it starts maybe crafting its own truth. So, all right, let's go look at some of the other models and the question we're actually going to pose to it. So we're going to use Gemini here and show you the OG in the deep research world. This is where you find Gemini 1.5 Pro with deep research. I'm going to put in the query that we have, and this is a big query. I won't go through it all, but basically what it's saying is, hey, we like Ted Lasso. We want some uplifting shows. We want positivity, good relationship shows, things like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I intentionally outlined to say, don't return something where there's a negativity in this show that's trying to craft the humor, but trying to come out with a positive message. So if we see Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which, spoiler, we do, that is a complete outlier. That should be not in the report by definition. So I'll kick this off, and just like the others, this thing goes through a moment and then asks, this is how I plan on working on this. Do you want to update me? Here's all the things that I'm looking for, the kind of information that I will give you. Do you want me to go forward with this, or do you want to edit my plan? So we'll let that research start. And then now let's go look at some of the results of these things. All right, if you're using Gemini. Now, admittedly, as I said, Gemini is using 1.5 models. Their 1.5 model is not nearly as good as the 2.0 model. No doubt they will be updating this in the near future, who knows when, but I would say hold out for this if you already have Gemini and don't necessarily need very deep research right away. This one works exceedingly well already, but it's using the 1.5 model, so things come out a little bit more generic feeling. If you remember maybe a year ago with ChatGPT, when you asked for a response, you could kind of identify that it came from an AI or that it was an LLM response. It always had this same kind of flavor to it. 1.5 seems to exhibit that same behavior, and you can tell if you read through these things, it feels a little bit like a high school report rather than a college or a graduate report. But in any case, let's look through some of the results that they came up with. And their formatting is very interesting. It created a segment for each one of these. You can see the recommendations it came up with are Schitt's Creek, and I asked for all of these fields. What might be interesting is I asked for what service it might be streaming on. I also asked for an average user rating, number of seasons, and number of episodes. These are things that are a little bit tricky unless you're using an API, and even then, getting the streaming information off of an API can be a little bit tricky and sometimes is a pay mechanism. So the fact that they've all sourced this information, all of them were successful at it, by the way, is really exciting. It's very interesting to see. So it got an 8.5. It's on Hulu, 80 episodes, Abbott Elementary, Parks and Rec. So these are kind of standard fare for positivity, good vibe kind of shows. Good Place, Jane the Virgin, available for purchase on Amazon Video, Apple TV, and Google Play. That's an interesting one because it is saying streaming service. Kim's Convenience, Friday Night Lights, Parenthood, Pushing Daisies, Wonder Years, Ghosts US version, Heartstopper, Extraordinary Woo. It gets really big benefit from me for pointing out Extraordinary Woo. If you haven't seen the Extraordinary Attorney Woo, definitely go check it out. But it definitely falls directly inside of the Venn diagram I'm designing here. Positivity, overcoming things that are not necessarily an evil other that they have to fight. So this one was an interesting find, and it's also obscure. It's one of the things I asked for is look for shows that might be a little more obscure. Welcome to Wrexham. And then it goes through a little bit of definition about those things. And of course has all of the references that it went through. Another very nice thing about Google, just so that you know, you can open this in Docs. So this immediately opens up as a Google Doc. and then you can keep it that way. You can, of course, keep it like everything else inside of your list of previous searches, but you can open it up as a Google Doc immediately, which is kind of cool. Okay, for a second, I want to show you Perplexity because everybody has access to Perplexity. It's a free tool that anybody can use. Under this drop menu, you'll see the Deep Research feature. If you have any thoughts of looking into deep research kind of stuff, go use Perplexity right away, especially if you don't have any other services. All right, but so here's the Perplexity result. It went through 34 sources. It also came out with some obscure Sports Night, Friday Night Lights, Shrinking Good Place, Schitt's Creek, Parks and Rec, Acapulco, Reservation Dogs. And one of the interesting things about Perplexity, because it's really a web search engine is its context, is as I select these, you can see it has a disclosure there saying follow up, which is curious. So it's not just a link to the location. If I click on that, you'll see it will run another deep search or deep research on the detectorists. Very interesting that in line, if you want to dive deeper, I think this one has some interest to be able to say, give me top 10 books of something, dive into it if you like the book, dive into the next one if you like that book. And you might end up with a nice page here of all the books that you researched and be able to save that off. So I think this one's really worth mentioning. I think their results here are very strong, especially as fast as they are. They're a much faster service. They're not doing nearly as much thinking. Admittedly, this is not a deep think kind of request. It's more of a data collection request. Let's move on to the next one. All right, Grok 3, they have a button in the bottom that you can select to either go into the deep search or the think mode. We did deep search here as it's highlighted, gave it the same prompt. It has, frankly, kind of a nice panel that you can watch it work through. I think that this is kind of an elegant mechanism to go through. You can also open up all of its thoughts if you need to see everything that it was thinking during that time, and you can see all of the thinking that it did. It is a very fast and thoughtful model. 50 web pages is what it looked through. Of course, you can go into those resources as well as needed. And then let's take a look at what it came up with. Show recommendations, same kind of list. I Love Lucy, which is an interesting one that it started with. I don't know that I would put it into the same positivity. So that one is curious. Friends, also definitely a positive vibe show. Mindy Project. It has the Great British Baking Show though. And I have to say, for just creativity, I like that they put that one in there. That's very interesting. And most of the others are relatively standard. Comiskey Affair is the only one that has this, The Great North. And as you go down, it kind of describes why it was choosing some of the things that it chose, detailed evaluation and selections. And then at the very, very bottom, which I think is kind of an interesting way to do it, these are the key citations, noting that it had 50 citations to begin with. Let's go to the granddaddy. Okay. So now we're back. This is OpenAI's Deep Research. I put in the prompt, it came back, it asked me some more questions. I responded to the questions. We just did that, so you know that pattern. It says, great, here's what I'm gonna go do. I'm off. And it went off for 12 minutes and did its thing, which is much longer than any of the others. Interestingly, it is more difficult to get to the thinking in this system. So you click on this link here, which will bring up the thinking that it was doing, so you can look through all of the different activity. And as you can tell, it's not nearly as much represented thinking as Grok. I think Grok is much more open about dropping their thinking out, and this one is a little bit more summarized, and also the sources are next to that. Let's take a look at how they did it. I really like the way that OpenAI broke things down. I didn't ask it to, but that's okay. It's a research assistant that I asked to go do this, and they came up with their own methodology, and they broke it down by kind of genre, if you will. So the comedy live actions, Parks and Rec, Schitt's Creek, Good Place, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So this is the big loser. This is the one I was telling you about that should not have been on this list. That's worth knowing about. I'm not sure why they included this one. Kim's Convenience, Abbott Elementary, and Detroiters. All still very reasonable. Citations all over the place. That's curious. I would say I'm not sure this is the way that we would want a table done. It's not bad, because if I see that they say that The Good Place is playable on Netflix, but it's not, I can see where it saw literally that value from. Some of the other tables you might have noticed didn't have any of the citations in them. In fact, one of them had a series of these citations, footnotes at the bottom, just strung out. So it's very difficult to tell which one goes where. So this one, at the very least, if you need direct citations of everything, you'll also notice this is a behavior of OpenAI's Deep Research. I actually kind of like this. It's these citations by kind of domain name on each one of them. And as you hover over them, you get a peek of the item that it came from, which is very interesting. interesting. So if you copy this out, it also copies out quite nicely. It uses the page title. So this would say watch Parks and Rec streaming pipe Peacock in parentheses at this location in what you've copied and pasted somewhere else. So their formatting is pretty good for being able to just pull this out and use it somewhere and be able to keep the citations. Little things, but when you're doing research projects, those kinds of little things to me are really very important. I will also say I really do like this section. We're kind of glossing past it, but this is saying, why did I choose these comedies? Brooklyn Nine-Nine is a buddy comedy, a buddy cop sitcom with a lovable precinct family that always has each other's backs. Okay, maybe that's true. And Schitt's Creek transforms a family's misfortunes into heartwarming riches to rags tale of love and community. So it kind of is going through and contextualizing why it pulled each one of them in. And on a bigger report, I've done a couple bigger reports, it does this same kind of thing and does a very good job of remembering the contextualization. And it looks much more like a report rather than the results of a report, which the others that we've looked at so far all have that standard template of, well, here's my results, rather than why did I pull this information in? And I think that's actually my biggest distinction between OpenAI's version and the others. And I think it's the O3 model underneath and how they've tuned it to actually do research considered. So I think they're really making it think about the research it's doing. I'm not going to claim that it's got better efficacy because of that, but it does feel a lot better as I'm reading through it, that I feel like you thought about this and this is why it's in there. Good enough. I can disagree with you, but I understand why you put it here. That's meaningful. Going through the rest, drama and dramedy, live action, Friday Night Lights, Heartstopper, Gilmore Girls, and with an E. So all of these are here for comedy reasons, and it does the same kind of thing below it. And then animated, it does a little section on animated, reality documentary. So that's kind of OpenAI's. Very briefly, I understand we've looked at a lot so far. Let's very briefly look at what this looks like from a thinking model and from a standard model request. Just so that you understand, you may not need this. If you have real reasons for a system to go deep, you really want it to go do as much research as possible. They gave some examples that maybe are meaningful. I want to find the best skis for this mountain or this kind of skiing. I'm looking for a cheap price. I've had it like this before. And you want it to really go through as many resources as it can before it returns a report to you. Then you might really have a value for this. If not, and you're just trying to say, I really want you to consider as much data as possible to answer this question, something like Perplexity might work. Something like the non-research models might work. Okay, for this one, I'm actually going to bring in Claude. Claude just released 3.7 Sonnet. 3.7 Sonnet does have the potential for extended mechanisms, so you can make it think. So this is the idea. If I remember, I was talking about Claude has released this composite mechanism. You can kind of go in and say you want a new chat. And when you select a new chat, you can tell it you want normal chat, so you don't need it to think real deeply, or extended thinking. So please think more deeply about it. So that's what I did on this one, is the more extended thinking. So we can use this one as the one example of a thinking model that went and did some work and then came back with results. And as you can see, the results that you come back with here are very, very, very similar. Most important, I'm less concerned with the data itself, because it feels like there's a Venn diagram that everybody fell into to get most of these, though this one has some unique ones. Most important is it really did do the harder work of figuring out what IMDb and what streaming availability it was, and even number of episodes. These things are not in one place typically. It's a little bit harder to get to sometimes. So the fact that it found this for each one of these shows, presumably correctly, is very impressive. And it's also worth mentioning that Claude does not go out to the internet. It's still one of the major gaps for Anthropic and their models is it can't search for the internet. Let's ask it a simple question. So you'll see I asked about the Grok 3 model that very recently released. It thought about it, it pondered it, and it says, I don't have any specific information about that. My knowledge cutoff is October 2024, and it seems to have occurred in February 2025. This is enormous. This is a very big reason in my book to not use Anthropic for a while, even though this model seems really strong, and I certainly use it from a coding standpoint. Without the internet is table stakes right now. The internet is on all of these other models. In fact, let's go quickly take a look at Perplexity. Okay, so this is kind of the last spot. Well, I'll show you this one, and then I'll show you OpenAI's as well. This was just Perplexity. This is not Perplexity's Pro mode. This was not their thinking mode. This was just their standard request from the internet kind of Perplexity. Same query that we've been asking on all of these systems, and what it comes back with is very commensurate data. Can't tell if it's absolutely the same, exactly right. There's a few different things in here that are interesting. Only Martyrs shows up, which is great. Reservation Dogs shows up, which is great. So there's a couple things that you think, oh wait, this might actually have better results. Not really sure, but it does go through basically the exact same set of results. And this was just Perplexity, came back in no time, of course. So you may not need deep research at all for some of the things I thought. I have done this dive myself in the past, and it did take myself deep research. Nowadays, just having the internet in the hand is maybe the answer. That's maybe the quickest way to get through this. So you might not need all of these advanced models. Like I said, let's look very briefly at what GPT-4o, if you're just using ChatGPT and you said the same thing to it, because that's the likely pattern that most people will have. Okay, here we are. ChatGPT-4o, standard, no search, no deep research, nothing special. Let's put our prompt in. Let's kick it off. Searching the web. As I told you, 4o already does its own searching of the web when it thinks it needs to, even though we didn't tell it to search. In fact, this button actually seems to indicate I want search results back, not just an answer. So treat it more like a web search. So that should probably be web search results rather than just search. But 4o and other models with ChatGPT will go out and search the internet, and it comes back with, you guessed it, pretty much the same results. Very similar, at least. Let's see, anything really new? Tuca and Birdie's new. I think the Dairy Girls, maybe it didn't show up in others. So really, the vast majority of this stuff, the same as Grace and Frankie. So your mileage may vary on the kind of query that you're doing, but something like this I've done in the past, and as I've said, it was pretty sophisticated to do, to get this kind of data across 10 shows. And that was not even asking a system to go figure out the shows for me. This is if I knew the shows. Getting this information was a little arduous. That has changed. Oh, sorry, I almost forgot. Sorry, had to bump in here. I couldn't forget the most exciting part of what we just did. We gotta get the brownie recipe. Let's take a quick look at what it came up with.
Indulgent, fudgy brownies with real milk chocolate and swirls of gooey caramel. The ultimate treat. This recipe is inspired by a highly rated brownie from a popular baking author. Each bite blends crisp edges with an ooey-gooey center of sweet, salty caramel.
Oh, yes! Now we're talking deep research. All right, so the big takeaway here may very well be you don't need deep research. I don't think that's true. I'm excited to have deep research, and in fact, Plus users for ChatGPT only get 10 a month. I think that's true. Yeah, only 10 a month. And I think 10 a month to me feels like not enough because I do want to use it for certain things. I'm just not sure I actually need it. So after this dive, I've kind of determined it's possible. Certainly other tools will be able to get me pretty close in many cases. But it's possible I don't need the deep research at all. I just need the thinking model. And in other cases, I don't even need the thinking model. I just need the direct model. This is stuff that in the past would have taken real research on my part, so I presume I'll need a research system to do it. Very interesting that that may have changed. So what I would advise, if you have a model that you like, if you have a system that you already pay for, look at their deep research, make sure it does what you want. If it doesn't, or you don't pay for something, go buy Grok right now. It's on X. As a model, Grok 3 is a very strong model, and its deep research currently is free, so you may as well go use it. I think it works excellently. But the real secret here, amazingly, I did not think this would be the outcome, is Perplexity wins. Perplexity is free for all users. The fact that they've figured out a way to give this to everyone, I think that what they're offering, the results I've gotten back from it, are very reasonable. If I was in college and I was trying to research something to do a report on it, Perplexity wouldn't frankly be enough. It wouldn't be maybe half enough. But that's not its offering. It's not offering to be the world's best research assistant. It's offering to compile information from the internet. And it does that fantastically. So if you wanted to say, go get as many resources as you can and give them back to me. At the very least, I'll have a bibliography that I can go through and look at all the sources that you came up with. Then it does great. And the report that comes back is a good summary of what's going on. Grok, very, very good. OpenAI, hands down, the best. Unquestionably, it's sourced the best. It's the cleanest in its write-up and its presentation. It seems to ask the right questions. I really like what OpenAI is doing here, but at the same time, it's kind of expensive, let's be honest. If that's not the thing you need, use something else. Well, this was a really surprising finding for me. I hope looking through all of these different tools like this was kind of an ad nauseum video. I've kind of dragged you through everything, but hopefully you've seen as much of everything as you could see to understand what all of these different models are and what the different modes are and when you might use them. And really, frankly, the answer, as you've probably already known, or you didn't really know you knew it, you don't knew you know it, you don't know that you did it. The thing you've probably been doing all along anyway without knowing it, that's the one, is just search the standard model and see if it gives you back what you want. The best advice I can give you, use the standard model, give it more context. Don't ask a simple question. That almost always doubles the output. It gets you much better results. That's the place I would start. Then go to a thinking model and say, you give it a shot. Let's see what you come up with. Then go to something like a Deep Research or Perplexity. That's my advice. Well, this was a big one. I apologize. It wasn't necessarily meant to be, but I really wanted to get you as much of the information about the different modes and models that are out there so that you could see that maybe there isn't as much distinction as they seem to make it out to be. Thanks for coming along on the ride on this one, and I'll see you in the next one.